For decades, Hollywood has convinced audiences that what they see on screen is the filmmaker's true vision, polished, intentional, and final. But beneath that glossy illusion lies a very different truth. Many of the biggest action films of the last 40 years are not the movies their directors originally made. They are rebuilt, creations stitched together after long nights of panic inside studio offices, rewritten in secrecy and reshaped during expensive reshoots that the public was never supposed to know about. These hidden operations happen for one reason: control. When test audiences react poorly, when studio executives grow nervous, or when an actor delivers a performance that doesn't match the marketing plan, the solution is always the same: go back and quietly change the movie. Rewrite the ending, remove the violence, add humor, make the hero more likable, delete the scenes that feel too real, and do it all fast, often just weeks before the release date. What you saw in theaters may have been only a shadow of the original film. Entire storylines have vanished. Final acts have been rebuilt from scratch. Some movies once had endings so bleak, so violent, or so brutally honest that the studio buried them forever. In other cases, the alternate versions still exist somewhere in vaults, locked away and never shown to the public. Tonight, we're pulling back the velvet curtain on 15 Hollywood action films that went through massive reshoots, secret rewrites, deleted finales, and scenes that were deemed too dangerous or too disturbing to show the world. These are the movies that almost became something entirely different. Are you ready to see what Hollywood never wanted you to discover? In fact, one World War Z 2013. When World War Z wrapped principal photography, the studio expected a standard blockbuster, but what they got was an unwatchable final act that stunned even Brad Pitt. The original ending was a grim, chaotic battle set in Moscow, where Gary Lane becomes a hardened killer, trapped in a war with no resolution and no hope. It was raw, bleak, and brutally realistic. Test audiences hated it. Executives panicked. And within days, the studio quietly ordered a massive reshoot that would replace the entire final third of the movie. What followed was one of the most expensive secret rewrites in modern Hollywood history. Damon Lindelof was brought in to craft a softer, more emotional climax. Dozens of scenes were scrapped. Entire characters disappeared. The film we know today, a contained suspenseful finale set inside a World Health Organization facility, was created from scratch. Almost nothing of the Moscow storyline survived. Had the studio kept the original version, World War Z might have been remembered as one of the darkest zombie films ever released. Instead, the audience received a safer, more commercially friendly ending that completely altered the tone of the story. Back to Rogue One, a Star Wars story, 2016. Among all modern blockbusters, Rogue One may be the most infamous example of a film transformed in secrecy. Nearly half of the footage seen in the trailers, including Jyn Erso confronting a TIE, fighters storming across the beaches with the Death Star plans, and several heroic sequences never appeared in the final cut. That's because Lucasfilm initiated a massive reshoot operation after early edits were deemed too bleak and lacking emotional clarity. Entire scenes were rewritten. Key plot points were rearranged. New material was filmed to strengthen character arcs. The ending in particular was a battlefield. In some early cuts, the main characters survived. In others, the tone was far more chaotic and brutal. Ultimately, the studio chose a definitive, sacrificial finale, but only after weeks of reshooting, rewriting, and re-editing in total secrecy. The film you saw was a carefully engineered reconstruction, built from both old and freshly shot material. To this day, fans are still trying to piece together what the original Rogue One truly looked like, a version that only a handful of people at Lucasfilm have ever seen. Fact 3: Suicide Squad 2016. What audiences believed to be a wild, neon-soaked anti-hero film was originally something very different. David Ayer's first cut of Suicide Squad was darker, slower, and more character-driven. But after the success of Deadpool and the criticism directed at Batman v Superman, Warner Bros. Panicked. They secretly hired a trailer editing company to recut the film and then ordered extensive reshoots to inject more humor and reduce the movie's violent, grim tone. Entire Joker sequences, some of Jared Leto's most intense scenes, vanished. Subplots connecting Enchantress to the broader DCU were cut. The emotional core between Harley and the Joker was restructured. The studio's goal was simple: make the movie feel more like a flashy music video and less like a psychological crime thriller. What emerged was a hybrid film stitched together from competing visions with reshoots so significant that many cast members later admitted they were unsure which version the public would ultimately see. Fact 4: Justice League 2017. Few blockbusters have undergone a transformation as drastic or as secretive as Justice League. When Zack Snyder stepped away due to a family tragedy, Warner Bros. Seized the opportunity to reshape the entire film. Joss Whedon was brought in not just to finish the project, but to fundamentally rework it. What followed was a quiet but enormous reshoot operation that altered tone, pacing, story arcs, and even character motivations. Whole sequences Snyder filmed were thrown out. New comedic beats replaced the bleak operatic style that defined the DCEU up to that point. Much of the cast later revealed they spent months shooting material that wasn't in Snyder's original script. Character arcs were softened, the villain Steppenwolf was redesigned, and the final act was stripped of darker narrative threads that set up future films. The version released in theaters bore so little resemblance to the original that fans later launched a global campaign demanding the Snyder Cut. Only with its eventual release did the public finally understand just how drastically the movie had been rebuilt in secrecy and how far the studio had gone to hide the existence of the original film. Fact 5: The Bourne Identity 2002. The film that revived spy thrillers almost didn't make it to theaters. After test screenings left Universal executives deeply worried, the studio ordered sweeping reshoots that reshaped the entire final act. Joe Lehman's original ending was understated, a quiet, emotional resolution focusing on Jason Bourne's internal transformation. But the studio wanted a bigger, more aggressive finale with clear stakes and a faster pace. As a result, massive chunks of the third act were discarded. The reshoot process was chaotic. Filming resumed months after production had wrapped, forcing Matt Damon to re-enter character while juggling other projects. New action sequences were added, including a more explosive climax and a heightened confrontation that aligned the movie with the blockbuster tone the studio demanded. Ironically, the reshoots created the version audiences now consider a classic. Yet few know that the film was once a much smaller, quieter psychological thriller until the studio secretly rebuilt it into the template for an entire franchise. Fact 6: I Am Legend 2007. The movie most people know ends with Dr. Robert Neville sacrificing himself to save a cure for humanity. But that ending was not the original plan. The early cut was philosophical, introspective, and far more faithful to Richard Matheson's novel. In the discarded version, Neville realizes the infected creatures are intelligent, emotional beings capable of complex relationships. He becomes the monster in their story, an intruder who has killed their kind. The creatures leave peacefully, and Neville is left questioning the morality of everything he has done. Warner Bros. Executives feared this ending was too challenging for mainstream audiences. Worried it would confuse viewers and damage box office potential, they ordered reshoots to create a more traditional heroic sacrifice. What emerged was a simpler, more conventional finale that changed the entire meaning of the story. The original ending exists only in alternate cut releases and Blu-ray extras. Had the studio kept the philosophical version, I Am Legend would have stood as one of the most subversive blockbusters of its era, a film where humanity's greatest villain is its last survivor. Fact 7 GI. Joe Retaliation 2013. What was meant to be a straightforward sequel quickly spiraled into one of Paramount's most unexpected reshoot operations. After the studio screened early, Cut's executives panicked over two major issues: the film's tone and Channing Tatum's limited screen presence. Despite marketing him heavily as a leading face of the franchise, his character dies early in the original cut. Fearing backlash and a weaker box office, the studio delayed the film's release by nearly a full year and ordered extensive reshoots. These reshoots added new scenes featuring Tatum-adjusted action beats and incorporated 3D conversions to expand the film's commercial potential overseas. Large story elements were rearranged, character arcs were softened, and new connective tissue was created to repair narrative gaps. By the time the movie was released, the version audiences saw was a hybrid of original footage and a massive reshoot operation designed to reshape the franchise's direction. Few viewers realized just how drastically the film had been rebuilt, nor how close it came to releasing with an entirely different structure and lead presence. Fact 8 Quantum of Solace 2008. One of the most chaotic productions in James Bond history was forced into a corner when the Writers Guild of America strike hit mid-development. With no screenwriters available, director Mark Forster and Daniel Craig improvised structural changes themselves. Once filming wrapped, the studio discovered that several sequences lacked clarity, motivation, or narrative flow, resulting in a movie that felt fragmented. To fix the problem, MGM quietly launched a reshoot campaign to rebuild key parts of the story. Entire transitions were reworked, emotional beats were added, and new material was shot to give Bond's journey stronger continuity with Casino Royale. Action scenes were fine-tuned to appear more coherent, while certain plot elements were rewritten in post-production. The result was a film shaped heavily in the editing room, with reshoots serving as emergency patches over a wounded script. The final version is a testament to how Hollywood can reconstruct a movie under immense pressure. Yet it's also a glimpse into the version that might have existed had the strike not forced the production into unscripted chaos. Fact 9 Solo: A Star Wars Story 2018. What began as a lighthearted improvisational take on Han Solo quickly turned into a full-scale creative emergency. Phil Lord and Christopher Miller's original version leaned heavily into comedy experimentation and loose character interactions, far from the grounded tone Lucasfilm envisioned. Concerned that the movie was drifting too far from the Star Wars identity, the studio quietly removed the directing duo late into production and brought in Ron Howard to stabilize the project. But Howard didn't just finish the film, he reshot nearly 70% of it. Entire sequences were rebuilt, with new tone, new lighting, new performances, and in some cases, brand new dialogue. Characters were reframed, emotional arcs were rewritten, and the pacing was drastically tightened. The final product reflects a single, unified vision, but buried beneath it lies a nearly completed alternate film, one far more comedic, unconventional, and experimental. Only a handful of insiders have ever seen that version, making it one of Hollywood's most intriguing secret cuts. Fact 10 The Wolverine 2013. When James Mangold set out to adapt the Japanese arc of Wolverine's story, his goal was a darker, more introspective film that dug into Logan's trauma and moral decay. The early cut embraced that vision, moody, stripped down, and far more character-driven than previous X-Men entries. But when Fox reviewed the film, concerns rose around the ending, which they felt was too bleak and lacked the explosive spectacle expected from a superhero franchise. The studio quietly ordered reshoots to reshape the final act into something more conventional and crowd-pleasing. Entire sequences were brightened, emotional beats were simplified, and the narrative emphasis shifted from psychological conflict to physical confrontation. The original ending, harsher, more ambiguous, and truer to the Japanese noir tone, was completely replaced. Even the mid-credits stinger teasing Days of Future Past was shot late in the process to connect the film more tightly to the larger universe. The end result was still well received, but it was not the film Mangold initially crafted. Beneath the polished action lies a version that leaned even more heavily into Logan's internal struggle, cut away before audiences ever saw it. Fact 11 Mission Impossible Fallout 2018. Though widely considered one of the greatest action films of its era, Fallout endured a production filled with delays and secret rewrites, largely due to Tom Cruise's bone-shattering on-set injury. When Cruise broke his ankle performing a rooftop jump, filming halted for months. During that pause, the creative team revisited entire sequences, restructuring the flow of the film and adding new dramatic beats to strengthen character motivations. When production resumed, the reshoots weren't just pickups, they were expansions and reinventions of scenes that had never been intended to change. Some of the most iconic moments in the final film, including new emotional dialogue and extended action choreography, were conceived during this unexpected break. Meanwhile, Henry Cavill's contractual mustache, due to his role in Justice League, forced visual continuity shifts that required even more reshooting to maintain coherence. Behind the scenes, the film was being rewritten and reshaped almost in real time. Yet the audience never noticed. The seamless final cut hides a tumultuous, reactive production that relied on reshoots to elevate the story into one of the franchise's most acclaimed entries. Fact 12 Blade Trinity 2004. If there is any film that demonstrates just how chaotic a production can become, it is Blade Trinity. Wesley Snipes, frustrated with the script and direction, reportedly clashed with the crew, refused to shoot certain scenes, and even avoided direct communication with the director. As a result, many sequences featuring Blade had to be shot using stand-ins, doubles, or digital face replacements. When early cuts showed the narrative falling apart, New Line Cinema quietly launched a reshoot effort aimed at salvaging the story's structure. Large chunks of the film were reframed around supporting characters, especially Ryan Reynolds, Hannibal King, and Jessica Biel's Abigail Whistler. Entire plot lines involving Dracula's mythology were rewritten, and new scenes were added to fill gaps created by Snipes' absence. What was meant to be a Blade-centric finale became a patchwork built around secondary characters, stitched together in hopes of giving the movie some form of narrative cohesion. The final version barely resembles the darker, more focused film originally conceived, a testament to how reshoots can completely redefine a franchise's trajectory. Fact 13 Edge of Tomorrow 2014. Despite strong early buzz, the initial cut of Edge of Tomorrow left test audiences confused, particularly during the film's final act. The original ending leaned heavily into the time loop paradox, delivering a darker and more ambiguous conclusion that stayed true to the story's cyclical nature. However, Warner Bros. Grew concerned that the bleak tone and complex logic would alienate mainstream viewers. Their solution was quiet, but drastic order reshoots to rebuild the ending into something cleaner, more heroic, and easier to digest. Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt returned months after filming, wrapped to shoot a new climax, one that reintroduced the hopeful reset and crafted a more triumphant emotional beat. Additional connective scenes were added to smooth out the narrative flow, while some of the film's most experimental story elements were simplified or removed. The version released in theaters became a critical success, but beneath the surface lies a more philosophically daring iteration. Only those within the production have seen the original ending, a cut that would have left the audience with a far heavier, more unsettling final impression. Fact 14 for The Dark World, 2013. Marvel Studios faced a significant challenge during early screenings of The Dark World. Audiences wanted far more of Loki. Tom Hiddleston's performance had sparked an enormous fan following, yet the original cut featured him sparingly and treated his arc with emotional distance. Recognizing an opportunity and fearing negative feedback, Marvel quietly initiated reshoots to expand Loki's role, deepen his interactions with Thor, and inject additional humor and complexity into the story. Entire sequences were rewritten to give Loki more narrative weight, and new scenes were shot to clarify his motivations and reinforce his bond and rivalry with Thor. The film's tone was recalibrated as well. Darker passages became lighter transitions, where smooth and dramatic beats were adjusted to suit the Marvel formula. These secret reshoots reshaped the film, significantly turning Loki from a supporting antagonist into one of the MCU's most compelling emotional anchors. Without these late-stage changes, The Dark World would have been a far more somber and distant chapter in the franchise. Fact 15, Rambo, 1988. Behind the muscle-bound spectacle of Rambo, lies a deeply complicated production shaped by geopolitical tension and last-minute studio interference. The early version of the film contained heavier political commentary, portraying the conflict in Afghanistan with unfiltered brutality and moral ambiguity. When international concerns and shifting alliances made the original storyline risky, the studio quietly ordered a series of reshoots to soften the political tone and reframe Rambo as a more straightforward hero rather than a participant in a controversial conflict. New scenes were added to emphasize camaraderie, simplify motivations, and reduce elements that might provoke diplomatic backlash. Several action sequences were redesigned to feel less grounded in real-world warfare and more aligned with Hollywood spectacle. Entire lines of dialogue, along with versions of the film's original ending, were discarded. The final cut transformed what could have been a harsh, morally complex war drama into a more commercially digestible action film. Beneath all the explosions and heroic poses lies the shadow of a very different movie, one the public was never meant to see. Bonus fact, Mad Max Fury Road 2015. Few modern films have a production mythology as turbulent and as secretive as Mad Max Fury Road. What audiences ultimately saw as a kinetic, post-apocalyptic masterpiece was born from years of uncertainty, delays, internal conflicts, and an extraordinary reshoot process that quietly reshaped the film from the ground up. George Miller began with a much more surreal dialogue-heavy vision that leaned deeper into dream logic and psychological fragmentation. But as filming stretched on and tensions between cast and crew escalated, Warner Bros. Grew increasingly anxious about the film's unconventional structure. When early cuts revealed a version that was experimental, non-linear, and difficult to market, the studio stepped in. They ordered extensive reshoots, bringing Miller and key cast members back to add connective scenes, clarify character motivations, and heighten emotional beats between Max and Furiosa. Entire action sequences were re-edited or rebuilt to emphasize rhythm and visual clarity. Additional close-ups of Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron were shot months later to strengthen the dynamic between the two reluctant allies. What makes this reshoot story remarkable is not just its scale, but its secrecy. The original version of Fury Road remains locked away with only a handful of insiders knowing how drastically different it was, reportedly stranger roar, and even more chaotic than the final film. And yet, the reworked version became a modern classic proof that a movie can be torn apart and rebuilt in the shadows, only to emerge as a masterpiece the world never realized was almost something entirely different. Hollywood has always thrived on spectacle, but what happens behind its closed doors is often far more dramatic than anything shown on screen. The films you watch tonight were reshaped, rewritten, and in some cases rebuilt entirely, all without the audience ever knowing how close they came to being something else. And these 15 titles are only a glimpse into a much larger world of secret cuts, buried endings, and shadow productions that studios hope will never surface. If you want to keep uncovering the stories Hollywood hides, the forbidden versions, the lost footage, the scandals, the lies, and the battles fought behind the scenes, make sure you stay with this channel. There are still countless secrets waiting behind the velvet curtain.